recording here.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to, Rosemary Hook is here. And I need
They're gonna keep coming in. That's just the way it is. Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. But let me go ahead and pin you guys.
Yeah.
Pin and Eileen.
Good.
Okay, there we are. Bueno, everybody, bienvenidas. We're so wonderful to see you here this evening for our monthly Las Comadres speaker series. This year, we are gathering Latinas who are breaking the mold in every arena. Tonight's interview will be recorded and added to the Las Comadres YouTube channel. Before we start, I want to ask everyone to please put yourself on mute. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them. Our interview will be a little bit shorter. Eileen will address that to you in a little while. Comadre Eileen, take it away.
Thank you. We're excited about the speaker series. It's not only growing and it's on YouTube, but we're having many new plans of what we can do in the future because we're chronicling Latino achievements in this country. I want to thank everybody who contributed their questions during registration. Sindy has been graciously able to redo her schedule in Puerto Rico to be with us tonight, and we will be I think we'll be ending at 7:30 East Coast time. So I want to get started and welcome everyone. I also, if you have questions afterwards, email us and we'll get them to Sindy. Sindy and I have crossed paths in our work for many years now. And now I'm an active scholarship chair at LULAC Council 11041. As I've watched you, Sindy, over the years, I was always taken by your outward calm, your focus on the possibilities when all around you was chaotic, and your insights and your resilience. As we begin this discussion, I think it's important to start with your history. Can you explain or share with us a little bit about your childhood in Honduras? What memories do you cherish or not cherish?
Primero que nada, Nora, Eileen y María, muchísimas gracias for having me. Mi nombre, Sindy Marisol María Magdalena Benavides Villeda Cervellón. Niño is my full name, which is both my paternal and maternal last names, as you know, and in some of our countries outside of the US, we carry both of our parent entities for very cultural reasons. And growing up, Eileen, I really don't have that history, unfortunately, of Honduras because I was brought at the age of 1 to Los Estados Unidos. And, that in itself is a story of tenacity and perseverance. My mom, she's less than 5 feet tall, so height has nothing to do with courage. And in the 1980s brought my 2-year-old son and her 1-year-old gordita, which was me. I was una comeloncita when I was a baby, to the United States. And what she was doing was that she was reuniting with my father in Los Angeles, in South Central Los Angeles. And so, when I think of my country, I think of America, Eileen, because all I have known since I was 1 is the United States of America. And although we have visited, and I don't know how many of you are immigrants and have experience going back to either your home country or your parents' home countries, in Honduras, I'm perceived as Americana, y me llaman la gringa. And, for some reason, I don't know if it's in the way that I walk, in the way that I do eye contact, in the fact that I don't have the local colloquialism, that they know I'm simply not from there. And interestingly enough, when I'm in the US, it's, well, where are you from? Virginia. No. Where are you from? Virginia. And so, sometimes it feels like we're neither from here nor there, but I would shift that narrative and say que soy de allí y también soy de aquí, right? I have 2 places that I am from.
So what were the challenges and positive moments that you remember as a childhood? Because I've met your mother and she's an unforgettable figure. So what was her impact and how did she support you in navigating this system?
Well, I will tell you, Eileen, that it has been the women in my family who have influenced me the most. And, from my mom, I will tell you, I learned really early on that I have a passion to make right what is wrong. When I see an injustice, it just fires something in my belly. And like it makes me, it gives me the understanding that I can get on a rocket and go all the way to the moon, right? Like if I see an injustice, I absolutely tackle it. And with my abuelita, who is just a central figure in my life, my abuelita, Soy la America, taught me the meaning of words matter. And when I was really young, she would call me her princesita. And in the same sentence, she would call me her guerrera. And from very early on, there's something powerful about the words that are spoken over you. And people would say, ay, pero es que Sindy es muy terca. And my abuelita would say, no, ella no es terca, ella es persistente y ella tiene mucho coraje. And so, like as a young woman, like that is so transformative. And I think part of it is also Eileen, just having such I think being an observer, me, public speaking actually is something that I have to really work really hard on because I'm a introvert by nature, extremely shy. And, if you had me pick between a hammock and a book and a reception, hands down, not even think about it twice, I would pick the hamaca con el libro and not the reception. But because I understand, Eileen, the role that I have, I understand the voices that unfortunately so many in our community feel that their voices and many don't speak up. I feel that as in this role as a CEO of LULAC, it's really making space and making time to channel all of our community and make sure that our voice is heard.
So did you always know you were college bound and that you wanted to be a public servant? Or was there a moment that triggered all of your goals and your path?
Eileen, I would say not necessarily. And, keep in mind, and, just to give you a little bit of context, my parents always instilled in my older brother and I, my two younger ones, the importance of education. But they always made it very clear that you get educated at home in terms of your values, in terms of your convictions. You get prepared, career prepared, in college and the university. And, my mom would always tell me, no me sacrifiqué para que no estudiaras. And, part of what my mom always honed in was that when you empower women, you empower the world, right? Because we know that when women are involved, we make things happen. And I don't know how many of you know that, once we get involved, like then you see kind of like the shift. And I don't know how many of you have noticed, even whether it's private sector or government, or even in the nonprofit sector, oftentimes, yes, there might be still overwhelmingly a number of organizations that are male-led, but typically behind that male is a very strong woman really making things happen. And so it's really, been a phenomenon, Eileen, to see that occurring. And it's really unfortunate that, coming in 2018 as the first Latina to lead LULAC as CEO, if you can just imagine, Latinos rights organization. It took 90 years to have the first Latina lead this organization. How many more organizations in these progressive spaces have ways to go for that gender equity to happen? And something that occurred to me while I was at high school, and just keep in mind, like so many of our immigrant communities, Eileen, when I was in high school, I was helping my mom clean houses. On the weekends, during the week, I was taking care of my little brothers. And then after they went to bed, I would study and read. And so when I was in high school, I didn't necessarily have the best GPA. My GPA was like a 3.2, which is pretty decent, but not high. depending on what the standards are. And so I remember Eileen sitting down with my school counselor, and she told me that I should think of joining the military and or think of a technical trade. And, you know, like for me, that was really an eye-opening experience because my mom had always said, no, hija, tienes que estudiar. But more than that, I also saw how with some of my peers that were not Latinos, the counselor would tell them with the same GPA, oh, you should apply to George Mason or you should apply to UVA. But that option for me as a Latina was not given. I was blessed, Eileen, that at that time there was someone, Ms. Lupe Silva Kraus, who was the parent liaison at TC William, who took me to the side and said, she's Mexican American, me dijo, mijita, you're going to apply and I'm going to help you. And she did that. And I applied. I got into all the universities I applied to. 4 out of the 5, I got scholarships. And so can you just imagine, had it not been for a parent liaison, the strong push from my mother, I would have never graduated valedictorian of my college class, gotten a full ride to go to American University, all because someone did not believe I was college material.
Wow, thank you. Did you immediately go into nonprofits in civil rights issues, or was that a journey that evolved over time?
You know, Eileen, it was absolutely a journey. And so, you know, I always had a heart of service. And part of it was, you know, I had a father and mother who had a house where our side kitchen door was always open. And I grew up in a house where sometimes we didn't know who was in the kitchen, but we knew that we were there to serve, por lo menos un vaso de agua, and to listen to whatever concern it was that they had, and to give them posada and somewhere to rest if needed, and to help as much as we could. And so I grew up in a household where serving was very innate, right? And it was really doing it out of a place of our heart. And also because I grew up in a family that's very faith-centered. And so, you know, I feel like I almost stumbled upon my career. And what really started my interest, Eileen, and I ended up doing political work before I actually went into the nonprofit sector, was, I don't know how many of you remember the shooting in Columbine. So I'm dating myself. So you kind of know my age now. President Clinton at that time came to my high school, TC Williams, and they were putting a panel together with the president. I was one of the few Latina AP advanced placement students that they put in the panel. And of course, they put me at the other end corner where I could not be seen. But I remember I had a lot of questions to ask. And, you know, after that, it really sparked an interest in terms of policy. And I remember when I, you know, visited Virginia State University, which is a historical Black college in Petersburg, Virginia, I had a really deep conversation with the dean of the school, Professor Baker at the time. And I was absolutely convinced that that was my school. So I ended up going into poli-sci. And when I graduated from Virginia State valedictorian, got a full ride to American University. And at that time, Eileen, is when I met someone by the name of Lenny Gonzalez, who is like the godmother of politics in Virginia, but she also happened to be a LULAC council president and founder in the state of Virginia. And she kind of brought me in under her wings. So I learned as a volunteer what LULAC was. When Governor Kaine wins in Virginia, he takes me to Richmond as the youngest cabinet member at the age of 23 to serve in his administration. And I became a council president at the age of 23. If you can just imagine, you know, a few years later, 2012, I am at the Democratic National Convention. I bump into Brent Wilkes, who's my predecessor, former executive director of LULAC. And at that time, he was looking to hire someone who could help at a national scale mobilize around civic engagement, keeping in mind I come from political campaigns. You know, I really thought that this was a good change for me. And part of it, Eileen, was that, you know, working with the governor in 2006, I always had to manage the governor's agenda versus our Latino community's agenda. When I worked at the Democratic Party, I had to manage President Obama's agenda, the party's agenda versus the Latino agenda. And so in the nonprofit sector, I felt like I could make 100% of the agenda the Latino agenda. And that's really what attracted me to public service. So, at that time in 2012, the battle was, one, do I go on to serve in the Senate with Senator Kaine, who had just won his election, or do I go into the nonprofit sector, or do I join the union world? And so there were so many options, and I do feel blessed that I had options, but I ended up going with the nonprofit sector. And part of it, Eileen, I think is that it's serving my community and really taking on 100% the agenda of our community.
Yeah, that was an important question. That was my next question. The trials of being a Latina in a non-Latino organization, as you try to keep a Latino agenda, is really, really difficult. But so is being a young LULAC woman who's now taking a place in the infrastructure of a national Latino organization. So how did you deal with those challenges?
Well, it was really interesting working in a non-Latino organization, right? Whether it was in government or whether it was at the party. And part of my learning lesson is that absolutely who you know matters, but what's most important is who you are matters. And believe it or not, the question or comment that I always got was, what is someone so kind like you doing inside of politics, right? And it was almost as if you could not be respectful and kind and work inside of campaignings. And, I had a really strong conviction that as a Latina, I was not gonna run over my own people to get to where I needed to get. I could do that on my own. And that certainly I would not speak ill of anyone, because it's important that we stand united and that we stand together. And by the way, we have so much to do that the focus should be on what we need to get done. But more than that, Eileen, I often found that, Latinos are pigeonholed, right? And oftentimes for non-Latinos, it's enough with just having one Latino or one Latina in the room, not understanding that we're close to 20% of the total population. So 1 in 5 Americans are of Latino ancestry. And as I think of the future, we're talking about 3 decades, 30 years, yours and my lifetime. 1 in 3 Americans will be of Latino ancestry, and somehow the rest of America does not get the importance of representation and making sure that there are Latinos in the room and that there's more than one Latina or Latino in the room.
And then you go into a Latino organization and you've got to prove that a young woman, because I think you're one of the youngest women heading a national organization, am I right? National nonprofit in the United States, is that correct?
Yes, Eileen. And so, so not only, being young immigrant and being a woman, but, in the context of our current national legacy organizations, by far the youngest. And with LULAC, it was absolutely a shift, right? Like this was the first time in 90 years that they had a woman, a Latina, leading the organization as CEO.
Kudos. So that kind of leads into the next question is, we're really a diverse group in Comadres, and we spread the entire country and including across the border. But the world is changing. So what do you see for a Latino future in a world that's really shifting its lead nations? And in the United States, as Latinas and Latinos make their way, we're in the middle of a passionately divided society that erases or ignores. And then we're caught with misinformation and social media that spreads the misinformation in a heartbeat. So what do we, as a Latina group of all different backgrounds and ages, what can we do?
Gosh, there's so much to unpack in that question. And what I would say, Eileen, is that let's first tackle the issue of misinformation and disinformation, right? Even within the Latino community, it's not only English and Spanish. Let's not forget our indigenous communities that may not speak English nor Spanish, right? They may speak un dialecto that's indigenous or another language other than Spanish. And, what we're finding as we look at data, as we analyze, information from previous election, is that absolutely our Spanish speakers are more vulnerable to disinformation because they don't have access to the breadth of resources that are available in English. And what I would also add is that, a trend that we're seeing is that Spanish talk radio shows have robust followings and are siloed from national media outlets that pick up facts and check disinformation on English talk show radios. And so they're not within that natural ecosystem. So that's why disinformation festers under the radar. And there's absolutely an increased potential, for example, to suppress our voices and for more disinformation and to spread across the country. And I know, in terms of LULAC, we're working a lot with Meta, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and so many other social media platforms to make sure that we don't see this public harm. And, and what I would say too is like, we also, and, this is just something to highlight, right? When you look at, misinformation and disinformation, the FCC, for example, places the onus on the public to complain about broadcasters airing false information, and consumers have to show that information is causing substantial public harm. But the problem is that the majority of our community, Eileen, don't even know that this mechanism exists. And then I just want you to stop and think. I mean, like, so many of us are always like running from one thing to the next. And unfortunately, that's the kind of like the culture that we live and embody America, that, I think this culture of busyness is something that we have to have a complete separate conversation about, but that so many in our community simply don't understand, how do you even, for example, report that this information is happening and that these falsehoods and untruths that are harming our community are escalating in terms of practice. And, I do want to flag that, we're heading into a midterm. These are conversations, Eileen, that we've been flagging for all the players involved, because it is a concern for LULAC in terms of what potentially is coming. But I would say, as I think of the vision of Latinos and Latinas in America, I just think that we have to remember, and, we're seeing so much change at the time, whether it's, critical race theory and completely eliminating the contributions that Latinos and Latinas have made in America, but also that, when we look at polling from the Latino donor collab, that what they're finding is that in average, Americans believe that Latinos are takers and not contributors. On average, folks think that Latinos are immigrants, when in fact, the majority of us are US citizens, so many of us multi-generational. I personally happen to be an immigrant, but the majority of my colleagues have been here for multiple generations. And, we have these discussions all the time in terms of, even as Latinos and Latinas, are we understanding our own history? Are we questioning where we're gathering that information and who's writing and from what narrative are they writing? And, one of the things I always like to highlight, Eileen, especially when we're doing advocacy and leadership trainings with our youth and young adults, is that we have to know our history, right? Like the Guadalupe Hidalgo Treaty is something that's real. And, when you look at Nuevo Mexico, when you look at California and Texas, so many of the names and even the architecture speak to the history, the rich history of our community. And, there's so many contributions that Latinos are making in America, but yet, where we're failing is that we are too humble to talk about our contributions. And, I say that from a very humbling place, understanding that even as an organization, LULAC has always been that organization for 93 years that has gotten things done, but we fail to communicate what we get done, right? So, when people think about Head Start, LULAC should come to mind, because, it was LULAC in the 1940s and 50s that started the Little School of the 400. which then when Congressman Johnson becomes President Johnson, takes that model and creates Head Start, right? And how many people know that impact that LULAC has had just in one area of education? And then we talk about Mendez versus Westminster, which was the integration of schools in Orange County, California, right? And we talk about, Eileen, I always get teary-eyed when I think about President Peña, right? Who was so instrumental
Yes,
when it comes to
Mhm.
EEOC, right? And equal employment opportunities, and making sure that we were thinking thoughtfully about equal treatment. And I think about LULAC now, and I'm in Puerto Rico because our national convention is in July. And I know, Eileen, I'm going to talk about this at the end. But, you know, part of what we see in Puerto Rico, without getting into the politics, and I don't know how many of you saw the recent Supreme Court decision where the only dissent was Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, where unfortunately, you know, our Puerto Rican community is treated as second-class citizens, right? Like, if you can just imagine, if you're a Puerto Rican or even an American citizen from the States, you know, the moment that you're in Puerto Rico, because you're in a territory, you receive less benefits. But the moment you get on a plane and step into Texas or Virginia or California or Wisconsin, you get more benefits, but yet your citizenship status has not changed. And so, you know, I think as a country, we have to question, Eileen, what we're seeing today. We have to absolutely be thoughtful of the vision that we want to have. And, you know, I want to say that, you know, really like what I dream about is as a Latino community, as a Latino raza, as Latinas that we understand that we are the architects of our own future. And that oftentimes we give our power away, not even understanding it, that we give away our power. And understanding that we are more deserving to be in the rooms that we should be in, because we have always been contributors of this country, and that this too is our country. I oftentimes quote Langston Hughes. One of my favorite poems is "Let America Be America Again," because truly America has not yet been, and so it includes all of us.
Well, Sindy, we have a group here. There's women who are talking about career changes over 40, aging and elderly, but how do we get involved as individuals around the country? Where can the women get involved, and how could they also move up the ladder? Because we're running close in time, but we need your practical guidance of where do we go from here? Because we do know that we're getting kind of caught in the social change of the globe and of our own country. What do we do, and how do we build ourselves as leaders?
I would say, Eileen, first, Rosemary, I completely agree with you in terms of, you know, sometimes we actually believe the narrative that is being told. And, you know, what I have learned is that oftentimes we have the answer, right? Like sometimes we just need pieces of information, or we need to talk to the right person. And, you know, something that you will come to know about me is that every time that I do public speaking, I typically reference the Bible. I'm very faith-centered, and I do believe that, you know, we are meant to be here for a reason, and that there will be people that come into our lives who are there por una razón, right? Whether it's to build that confidence and that belief and that dream that you may have, or to instill inspiration. And, you know, Eileen, I would say that this is the right moment. There is so much opportunity that exists. And let me just give you one example. LULAC for over a year had been fighting for the federal government to disaggregate their federal contracting data for small businesses. They finally did it in December. And what we found is that when it comes to federal procurement with Latino-owned businesses, only 1.78% of all federal dollars go to Latino businesses. You know, why that question is important in terms of disaggregating the data is because now we have a base. We know that there is a lot of work that needs to get done, and this is just the federal government. Now LULAC is going to be taking on the private sector as well as state governments to disaggregate the data. And I just want you to think, you know, as small businesses, I don't know if your dream is to have a small business or continue to grow a small business, economic empowerment, right? Like, how do we build that multi-generational wealth for ourselves and for our familias and for the legacy that we want to leave behind? You know, so that's one particular area, Eileen.
So what's something that the women could do tangibly right now if they're sitting at home and they're working hard, but they say, I want to have more of an impact, or I need more skills? Where do they go in their local communities, or what's available? What's the first step?
You know, there's so many resources.
First.
Absolutely. Well, there's so many resources, right? In terms of organizations doing the work. I can speak to LULAC specifically. So we have a couple of things, right? Like, so if you're an entrepreneur, we have the Latina Entrepreneur Academy, where we're, you know, literally working on building, how do we make sure that we continue to build businesses? And it's everything from the financial part to giving away grants, to making sure we're doing those connections. Let's say that one of the businesses wants to do business with Target, right? How do they even get into the radar of a major corporation to begin scaling at that level? But beyond that, Eileen, we have something called 1 million Latinas Strong. And part of the vision of 1 million Latinas Strong is how do we continue to build that network of powerful Latinas that we are across the country. What we're trying to do is then go back and then segregate the data and make sure that our Latinas are connecting at the local and state level. But I would say, you know, with resources, there's resources within government. Sometimes there aren't any resources at all. And I just want you to take the example of the PPP loans, right? Where so many of our Latino businesses were left out because of the process itself and because they were not prepared. But I would say, Eileen, me pongo a la disposición de las comadres. I, you know, have heard so much about las comadres and Nora. Gosh, you're such a wonderful spokesperson for este grupo, but it truly is in working together, Eileen, that we rise, right? Like that's my tagline. That's what I use in my signature, together we rise, because it's, you know, by us providing those resources to each other, and sometimes even la confianza and that support that sometimes we need, because it's not always going to be an uprising hill. Sometimes you will be going through the valleys where we, you know, the most important thing is that we come out strong. But I would start, Eileen, in terms of resources. Absolutely. LULAC has some resources, but I would say there's other resources available in other organizations who are doing tremendous work when it comes to Latinas specifically.
Mm-hmm. So we really start locally and then move on and connect across the country.
Well, I would say, Eileen, you know, like I would start, you always start in your own backyard, right?
Yes.
It's what we say. But I would say, you know, there's resources at every single level. And so absolutely make sure that you don't box yourself in and look at everything that's in front of you.
And I made a commitment that I wouldn't keep you over, but I would like, if you can give us a couple of minutes to tell us about the conference in Puerto Rico, that would be awesome. And what are your goals for that conference? Because we are rebuilding Puerto Rico after this horrible time.
And you know, with us, again, this is the first time that we have our national convention since 2019. So we're excited to see each other in person once again. Today, I was mentioning to Eileen and Nora before we started Las Comadres that it's been a long day because we met with the Secretary of Education, of Labor, of Health. And really, it's finalizing those details as we gear up for the national convention. We're expecting about 2,000 people per day, and that's a conservative figure. We're keeping in mind that we're still in a pandemic, but there's so much excitement in terms of the Federal Training Institute, in terms of our youth convention, our collegiate symposium, and the general track session. And part of what we want to see, Eileen, is that as an organization, we don't want to just parachute in and leave. Our LULAC Puerto Rico leaders stay behind, but as a national organization, this is an opportunity to highlight the plight and the opportunities that exist in La Isla Bella. And for us as a national civil rights organization is to continue to push and make sure that our Puerto Rican community is not treated as second-class citizens.
We're excited, and I I want to thank you, and I wish we could continue this conversation for another hour, but I know you have a meeting to go back to. Thank you so much for your generosity in being here and sharing your life experiences. We learn from each other. And I have found as I get older, I'm learning lessons every day, new lessons. So it's invaluable for me to be part of this speaker series. Our program director, Maria Ferrer, could not be with us tonight, but she co-chairs this series with me. So mil gracias and mucha suerte en todo. Next month, May 25th, we'll be interviewing Raquel Mejia, who is a well-known producer and produced Dinora Desde on PBS. She'll be sharing her journey into another area where women are not totally, the door's not been opened, so she somehow entered that world and is succeeding. For more information, visit us at www.lascomadres.com. And I see you in Puerto Rico, but the work I can say that LULAC is just growing bigger and bigger every day. And mil gracias for all your hard work. And we didn't get to talk about your children, but that's another story. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Eileen. And
y Nora, gracias por todo. Nora is the brains behind all of this. And we thank you. So whatever we can do, let the comadres know how they can help LULAC in the future, okay? And how LULAC can help them.
Gracias, Eileen. Gracias, Eileen, y gracias, Nora. And I'll leave you with something that I live by, and that's that with every choice that we make, we choose to walk towards fear or we choose to walk towards love, and choose love. And remember that your story, your personal story, is something that others look at and follow. And I just hope that you understand your own power as a leader within your community, within your state, within our country. Muchísimas gracias, Eileen, y muchísimas gracias, Nora, y también a María, que la extrañamos. Gracias a todas.
Okay. Mil gracias.
Yes.
Okay. Nora, we just